Welcome to The Big Picture, a show that takes a deep dive into the political landscape of not only America, but right here in our own backyard of Illinois.
It's showtime, folks.
The Big Picture is on WCPT 820. And now, here's your host, Edwin Eisendrath.
Well, hello, and greetings from Wisconsin. Once again, I'm opening the show here from Wisconsin, where I'm canvassing with, scores of others. And I just want to say, when I showed up this morning in the office in Kenosha, I don't know, there must have been 70 people, in there getting their stuff, getting ready to go out. It's just exciting out here. And what I've heard so far going door to door, amazing, really amazing. I mean, you're knocking on doors of people who have other things going on in their lives. They're not thinking about politics every day, but every one of them has a pretty good idea that they want to vote. And, with a little bit of help about where to vote, they are on their way. It is exciting. Once again, I got to thank Paul for managing this show. I recorded it yesterday mostly and a couple of days before, so you have a great show, and I can actually know this because it's already recorded. This is live, and I'm going to go back and knock on more doors when we're done while you're listening to those fabulous interviews. And look, here's what I've got in store for you today. I started with 3 state party chairs, Ben Wikler, Lavora Barnes, and Anderson Clayton from Wisconsin, Michigan, and North Carolina, respectively. And you're going to want to hear what's on their mind as we close the books on this campaign. And then I talked with 2 journalists, but 2 very different kinds of journalists. One you're familiar with because I wanted to have Sam Levine back with us one more time. This time, he and I talk a bit less about the efforts to undermine our elections than we do about the resilience that we've worked so hard to build into the system. You can have confidence that your vote is going to be counted and that it'll be certified. It won't be easy all the way, but you can have confidence, so go do it. Finally, let's see. I wanted to have the last conversation before this election to be a little bit different, not about the politics. And the conversation it's fabulous. I'm going to be talking with a Mississippi journalist who really doesn't care about politics or partisan politics, but she does care about the truth. And she has really wonderful things to say about who we are and the challenge of this moment we're in. So you're going to want to hear her. She's great. Look, after all this time together, and I want to say I've done, I don't know, certainly more than 250 of these shows with you. I'm an optimist, but I don't think I'm in fantasy land. I've thought a lot about our country, and I've always thought we would prevail over the pernicious threat that Donald Trump embodies. But I never thought it would just happen. The reason why I was an optimist is I always thought that we, ordinary Americans, we would work extraordinary hours to get this job done. And my optimism has been rewarded. Oh, my gosh, it's been rewarded by what I saw this morning. It's been rewarded by what's gone on in this campaign. It's been rewarded by the resistance to Donald Trump when he was president, starting with the Women's March. It's been rewarded by all of you. For all this time, you have tuned in, you've brought your own ideas, your own research, you've read and shared what I've written on Substack. And look, you've encouraged others to get out and join the fight. I couldn't be prouder of you. And, here in Wisconsin, I see the evidence everywhere. When I knock on doors and I find someone who's ready to go to vote, when I knock on another door and I find someone who is sick of how many times other people have already knocked on their door asking them to go vote, it's a sign that there is enormous enthusiasm. It shows that we are reaching out to our fellow Americans and letting them know not just what's at stake, but what we can do about it. And look, we've had guests on who've talked about this. Throughout history and across time, scholars teach us that fascists thrive when they can make people feel helpless. And Trump and his gang have tried from, you remember this, I alone can fix it. The rest of you do, because I alone can fix it, he said, to his calls to execute his critics, or the big red wave, or their certainty of unstoppable victory. It's all frightening, and it's all designed to make us feel like the results are out of our hands. And once they're out of our hands, we don't have a democracy anymore. And the amazing thing is, because fascists triumph all over the world doing this, but here in America, we didn't believe them. Instead, we went to work. And across the country, and not just in purple states and blue states, but in red states too. Across the country, hundreds of thousands of us are walking door to door. Millions more have made phone calls and sent texts and sat down the old-fashioned way to write postcards to people. None of this guarantees victory. And we aren't going to stop until everyone has had a chance to vote and every vote is counted and all of those counts are certified. We will not stop. But look, even though it doesn't guarantee a victory, it sure makes it a little bit more likely. And in a close election, I believe in door-to-door. I believe you meet people, you talk to them, you ask them to vote, and if it's close, that makes the difference. And you know what else? It tells me that we will not be helpless no matter what the future brings. This was a huge threat. It is an existential threat to our democracy, to our human dignity, and he stood up to it. It is an amazing thing. I'm recalling the first time we met, and the very first show that I did, I talked about how there has never been in all of human history a large, multiracial, multi-faith democracy where power is actually shared amongst the people. I mean, America's always been multiracial. It's always had women and men. It's always had multi-faiths, and yet power was not always shared. And over history, we've done a better job and a better job and a better job. But this is this third birth of freedom where we finally really succeed. And that has never happened, ever in human history. It was never going to be easy to get here. That's not how power works. It's never given. And look, it wouldn't be the greatest accomplishment in the world, as I think it is, if it were easy. Nope, we have to work for it, really work for it. And look, when our country elected Barack Obama, it was an historic achievement. It also launched a powerful regressive backlash, let's be honest. But here's the thing. If electing a black president was historic, electing a second black president becomes normal. And oh my gosh, isn't that something? Isn't that amazing? And you know what? If we achieve that new normal, it's in part because the promise of the 14th Amendment required the reality of the 19th. Women, not in opposition to men, but as themselves, made it clear, starting, I might say, with that huge women's march nearly 8 years ago, that they aren't going to be pushed around, that they demand to be respected as individuals on their own terms, not by what they mean to anybody else, but on their own terms, like everybody else. No different than how a white man wants to be treated, right? And you know what? When folks like Mr. Trump strip people of their rights, or what did he say last week? I'm going to take care of them whether they like it or not. Ugh. No. They don't like it. And you know what? They're not alone. Millions of American men don't like that kind of creepy patronage either. So what did we do? We worked. And we worked. And we are still working. And we are never going to quit because America is really as great an idea as there ever was. And it's a story that we all get to write together. And in this chapter, we are really talking about each of us grabbing a pen, each of us having a hand in writing that next chapter. So you've got your written. You have a great 3 hours of show in front of you. I am going back to knock on more doors because that chapter's not done. If I get a chance, I'll call in at the end when it's call-in time. We'll see how that goes. But right now, wish me luck as I go back out there and knock on some more doors. And again, it's a great show, and you are in fabulous hands with Paul. The next time we get together, this election will be behind us, and I sure hope we can rejoice together. We're going to go to break and start in on the first of these fabulous conversations with Ben Wikler in just a moment.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody. Ben Wikler is back with, we're at the end of the line here. And of course, we're taping the show because I'll be up in his state during showtime going door to door again, as I was last week. Ben, what can people still do? We have, 2 days. They can work election day. What can people do?
So the biggest thing that you can do is contact people in your own life who haven't voted yet and just check on whether they have a plan to vote and make sure that they're going to vote for Harris. The way to do that is to join the Democratic Party of Wisconsin's relational organizing team, friend-to-friend organizing. And the way to do that is to essentially sign up for any volunteer shift and then tell the organizers that you want to use Reach, which is the app that lets you load your own contacts and see whether they have already cast a ballot. The research is that when you contact someone you know, it's about 10 times as powerful as when you contact a total stranger. And it's still, we're going to be knocking on every door we possibly can. We're going to be doing every phone call that we can make, text message, all that stuff. And yet on top of that, it is just absolutely critical to do this personal outreach to the people who we actually have relationships with.
Okay, everybody, you heard it. Go to Wisdems, sign up, get Reach, and make those calls. You can't leave any of your friends behind now. How does it look? I mean, if you carry this state, Ben, there's really more at stake for you than anybody, because on top of holding the line as we need to for the presidency, you have a crucial Senate seat. You may pick up Wisconsin 3 for the House, and you might actually end the most radical gerrymander in the nation.
So the gerrymander's dead. We have fair maps. The question is, can we turn those fair maps in a single cycle into an assembly majority, or will it take a little longer? And, either way, we know we're going to make dramatic gains in the state legislature. And if we can actually win the majority, then it has massive long-term and short-term consequences for democracy here. The House races, we are fighting very hard in multiple districts. If you look at the national spending, the 3rd congressional district is one of the top battlegrounds in the United States of America. That's Rebecca Cook versus Derek Van Orden. That's where I'm joining you from right now.
Yep.
But the 1st is also an area where we're mounting a more powerful challenge, and the 8th than we have in a very long time with Peter Barca and Kristen Lyerly. And we have Democrats running in every congressional district. The Senate race is a toss-up now. It had been relatively safe, and then Republicans flooded in money and ran just a hideous, scorched earth campaign, incredibly divisive. That race is now considered a toss-up, and one where in the polling we have a slight edge, but you cannot sleep on it. And then there's the presidential, which is literally tied in Wisconsin in the polls. Now, I will also say that the energy on the ground on our side is phenomenal in a way that makes me think this might not be so tied in the final analysis. I don't see the kind of ground game on the Republican side that we have built on the Democratic side. And if we can turn out, the Republicans talk a lot about turning out low propensity voters. If we turn out the low propensity voters on our side, as well as doing the persuasion with Republicans who are sick of Trump and thinking about finally, casting a ballot to end the Trump era, This could be kind of like 2012, where it looked incredibly close until the actual ballots were counted. So I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I'm saying that we are shooting big here. We're not cutting back. We're not trying to just defend incumbents in a lot of these races. We're going for everything we can possibly fight to win, and it is all hands on deck. Welcome aboard. Let's do this.
I didn't see anybody knocking on a door for a Republican when I was out. Not anybody. And I was far from alone amongst the Democrats. We kept running into each other out there on in the field. It was, fun for us. And there was nobody on the other side.
That is, you're not alone in that experience. That's been the report in every part of Wisconsin. I've been to 32 counties in the last 10 days, or 2 weeks, I should say. And everywhere, people are seeing almost no signs of life from the GOP's ground game. And what signs we have are striking in part because it's not coordinated. There's individual Republican candidates and their supporters knocking for themselves for state legislature, for example. Yep. There are America for Prosperity, Koch network door knockers going out for Eric Hovde in the Senate race, but not for Trump. Elon Musk's super PAC, the America PAC, is out knocking for Trump, but not for any other Republicans. And in each of those cases, it is a kind of lackluster, low energy program, often with paid canvassers who are telling people at the doors that they actually support Democrats when they're voting themselves. It is so far from what anyone would dream of having for their candidate. And that doesn't, Trump has reportedly said to his Republican National Committee people, I will get people to the polls. You just prevent it from getting stolen, because he's still on his stolen election kick and presumably will try to throw out legitimate ballots after this election. But and we shouldn't discount the fact that he has overperformed his polls both times he's been on the ballot. So I'm not saying this is a walk, but the thing that gets you that last little edge that tips our whole state, we are doing it in a bigger way than I've ever seen, and the other side is doing it in a smaller way than I've ever seen, and that makes me glad to be us.
I feel the same way. It would have to be a really unusual, different than any other election we've ever had, for us not to have that advantage. Are you worried about the third-party spoilers that are all over the ballot?
I mean, it's my job to be worried about everything, so yes. That said, when you do a poll of the head-to-head of Harris versus Trump, and then you do another poll where you say, or you ask the same respondents, what if you had all the third-party options as well as the head-to-head major two candidates? Every poll that I've seen for the last 6 weeks finds that the multi-candidate poll does better for Harris than the head-to-head poll. The Marquette University Law School poll that came out yesterday, head-to-head, and that's the kind of gold standard Wisconsin poll.
Yes.
Head-to-head, it has Harris up 1. But when you add in the third-party candidates, you have Harris up 2. And the big reason for that is that RFK is still on the ballot in Wisconsin. And there's a lot of Trump supporting, or there's a lot of kind of far right voters who still don't like Trump for a variety of reasons, and some of them will not vote for Harris, but they will vote for RFK if that's an option. And so I think that there's a bigger danger for Trump here. Now, we're doing a serious push to communicate with with potential Stein voters about who Stein is, and the fact that she absolutely cannot win, that Trump says that she's helping him, that she's been endorsed by David Duke, that she's really running a kind of a predatory campaign, going after, in many cases, the most marginalized communities that disagree with Harris on policy, but know that Trump would actually be worse. And our message is that, there are people that are vote swapping. There are people in California. There's lots of different kind of ways to think about how to respond. But stopping Trump has to be a shared priority, because even if you disagree with Harris on something, you know that she won't send in U.S. troops to crush your protests, that she won't try to denaturalize and deport people who are American citizens. And I think I think we're taking that communication seriously and engaging with people who have concerns, who have deeply felt differences, in a way that hasn't always happened in presidential races and is important. And, that can also help to blunt the impact of people who, decide to cast essentially a protest vote for a third party. I don't see Trump doing that kind of communication with the RFK protest voters. And a lot of those voters, they know full well that RFK is now endorsed Trump, has been promised a huge amount of power in the Trump administration. They're just trying to protest against Trump, and in many cases don't want him to be the next president. So this is a danger zone for the GOP.
Yeah, I just had heard that somebody dropped a whole bunch of money into robocalls for Jill Stein.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's going to be a ton of stuff like that.
Yeah,
there's digital ads. There's all kinds of. I mean, there's a lot of shenanigans happening. But we're communicating publicly. The DNC has paid ads to Stein voters, and that is we're not taking it for granted that everyone's going to find their way to the right line on the ballot by themselves.
Are you at all worried about Election Day shenanigans?
So the thing that is most important about this election that is kind of not being written about anywhere is that the key to this year happened in 2022. Our whole system of democracy was in peril because the people who wanted to overturn the 2020 election tried to get into positions of power in state Supreme Courts, in the offices of the people who certify the elections, which in Wisconsin is the governor. They tried to move bills through state legislatures to make it easier to subvert elections, to even nullify election results. And in each of the battleground states, the key victories went to people who believe at least in the bedrock principle of democracy. And so in Wisconsin, we reelected Governor Evers. We prevented a Republican supermajority in the state legislature, and we won a majority in our state Supreme Court, which means that whatever shenanigans take place, if we win this election, it stays won. The ultimate decision makers here believe in democracy and think that the voters should choose. Now, the one exception to this is the U.S. Supreme Court. And we saw what happened with Bush versus Gore. And the risk is if it comes down to a single state, and in that single state there's some kind of legal dispute and it goes to the U.S. Supreme Court, then we could have a real disaster scenario. So the most important, most critical way to prevent the election from being overturned is to win bigger in more states. In Wisconsin, that means winning by more than 1 percentage point, which doesn't sound like a lot until you realize that would put you in a stronger position than in half of 2/3 of the last 6 presidential races here. Right. So that, if we can win by 1.1, like Governor Evers did in 2018, then Trump can't try to do a partial recount and disqualify votes in specific areas, all the kind of stuff he did in 2020. Republicans are already in court. I think they filed 100 different lawsuits already over voting rules, and they're losing over and over. But the key thing is that period, after the ballots are counted, or Trump, if he tries to declare victory preemptively, to make sure that we have enough of a margin that we don't wind up in a situation where the fate of democracy hinges on Trump's handpicked U.S. Supreme Court justices. And who gave him a big victory this week and said you could throw out votes in a state. Exactly. Yeah, and who also said he had total immunity from anything that he does in official capacity. I mean, there's very clearly a risk there, and But at the state level, in each of the battleground states, I have confidence that the will of the voters will prevail. So we just need to make sure there's enough of that will expressed through votes in enough places to prevent a judicial coup.
Young people seem divided. The polling is that young men are not as interested in Harris as I would have thought they would be. I don't know if I believe that polling.
I mean, I think that there's a real possibility that there's a bunch of different non-response biases that are not, that things go better with young voters, with voters of color, with a bigger gender gap. All these different things could happen that turn out better than you'd think, better than the polls make you think. That said, if you look at the Marquette University Law School poll just now, they found that, overall, men are favoring Trump. Young men 18 to 29 are favoring Trump by 1 point in Wisconsin. Young women 18 to 29 are favoring Harris by 36 points. So that's a 37-point gender gap among young people. And that's, even with that, you still have Harris up 1 point in the state of Wisconsin. And
apart from the politics, boy, I'd hate to be a young person today knowing that young men and young women are sort of more divergent in their views than maybe they've ever been.
Yeah, but also, I mean, if Trump is only up by 1 point among young men, that means half of young men are supporting Harris. So, half of young men are where like 86% of, or whatever the math is, the 36-point, advantage for Harris among young women. Like most young people are in the same place. But there's absolutely the case that the GOP has massively prioritized, kind of going to where young men are. That you can see that in where Trump has been spending his time in the final stretch. There's been a more systematic effort among Republicans to appeal to young men. And I think the thing that's plainly true when you look at the data is that Democratic policies are better for young men and young women and older men and older women. And making that case affirmatively is really critical. I spoke on the White Dudes for Harris call, and I have my White Dudes for Harris trucker hat, and I'm a proud White Dude for Harris myself. No longer qualify as young, but I think that making the case on issues that matter directly to people, and by the way, not to a kind of caricatured version of people, but to actually what they are actually concerned about when they think about the election. You have to go where the voters are and meet them where they are across gender, geography, generation, race, ethnicity, religion. Like every community needs to know that they matter to Democrats, and I think that is an enduring takeaway. But I think this election cycle reinforces it yet again.
All right, Ben, I know I have to let you go, and I don't want to do that before this election ends without thanking you. The people of Wisconsin, the people of the whole country owe you a great debt for the energy and the intelligence and the leadership skills you have brought to organizing in that state and lessons you've taught organizers across the country. If we win based on turnout, a lot of that sits with you. And I just can't tell you how grateful I am. And on behalf of everybody who's listening, thank you.
I really appreciate it. I will accept on behalf of the hundreds of people on our team that are doing amazing work, from our executive director, Cassie Finelli, all the way through our newest hires in the organizing team. People are working their hearts out, and our volunteers, tens of thousands, have knocked on more than 750,000 doors in the last 2 weeks alone in the state of Wisconsin. It is just breathtaking to see what everyone working together has built. And I feel like this effort on the ground is going to lead to a victory in Wisconsin.
All right. I'll talk to you on the other side.
Sounds good. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Are you tired of talking to yourself? We can get you an audience on the radio. You can produce and host your own radio show on one of our 2 stations. Please call 773-792-1121. That's 773-792-1121 and ask for Mark. Limited space available.
All right. I'm joined by the fabulous Lavora Barnes, who has done so much to lift up the state of Michigan, to help it become a blue state, to defend against completely crazy Republican nonsense, and now maybe help us elect the president and control the U.S. Senate and hold on to a majority in their state house. It's an enormous job. Lavora, how's it looking?
Well, first of all, it's good to be with you. It feels like it's been forever. Missed you. It feels good. When you are out in the field here in Michigan and you see the enthusiasm, you see the hard work that our candidates and our volunteers are doing, it's heartening, it's exciting, and it feels really good. I was worried. I think a lot of us were worried that boost of enthusiasm we got when the vice president took the helm at the top of our ticket would wane, and instead it's grown. I think somebody told me that we've had over 100,000 people reach out to volunteer since she became the top of the ticket, which is an enormous number. Hard to even imagine that many folks stepping into making phone calls and doing doors and such here in Michigan, but it's happening, and I feel I'm honored by the enthusiasm that the people have and by the terrific organization we put together to manage it all.
Yeah. But prior to our conversation right now, the 2 that preceded this were Anderson Clayton in North Carolina and Ben Wikler in Wisconsin. And what you guys have done by creating what you first talked to me about and taught me about were these on-ramps so that, anybody who has an interest in getting involved can get involved. Getting people out of their homes, out of the despair of reading their social media, and showing them how they can make their community stronger. And you got you got hundreds of thousands of volunteers. You got 100,000 there, 100,000 in North Carolina, 100,000 in Wisconsin. And these are people volunteering their time, and it adds up to an enormous movement of Americans.
It is, and it is so much better than wringing your hands. Our governor says, stop wringing your hands and roll up your sleeves. It is so much better, and I think it's better, frankly, for all of us mentally and emotionally to as Michelle Obama would say, to do something rather than just doom scrolling and worrying about it. Go out there and impact the outcome. Don't just let it be your vote. Make sure you go out and find others who can do it as well, and that's what we've built these state parties. Ben and I have been doing it for a while. Anderson came on board recently and has built a terrific program in North Carolina. So proud of the work that these state party chairs all over the country are doing to make it so folks can participate in this process in the way that is most comfortable for them. For so many cycles, we only allowed people to do the one thing, right? If you want to volunteer with us, I need you to knock doors. But we recognize that there people have different levels of ability, of skill, of interest, and we've got to make it easy for everybody to participate. So that's what we do.
Well, and you've got fabulous candidates who make people then want to participate, and they know how. So to talk a little bit about the Senate race in Michigan, it's a tough one.
Yeah. It is a tough one, and it's tough because Michigan is tough. As much as folks like to celebrate the work that we've done here and the victories we've had, each of those victories has been hard won. We take nothing for granted. Every election requires us to double and triple down on the hard work we do, and this one's no different. Alyssa Slotkin is a terrific candidate. She also happens to be an amazing member of Congress already who's doing great work for her district and for the state of Michigan. So she's got a great story to tell, and she's telling it all over the state, knocking the doors, having her team out there with us. She's on the trail all the time. Folks love getting a chance to meet her. And she's running against a guy from Florida, Mike Rogers. He used to live in Michigan, left Michigan, moved to Florida, went to get rich or whatever, and has decided that he wants to be back in politics and has I won't say come back because it doesn't look like he's actually moved back. This house that he claims to live in is not finished being built. I don't believe it has an occupancy permit. It's got porta potties outside, but he claims he lives there as he is running for this Senate seat. And he's going to be another MAGA extremist. He's going to be an apologist for Trump and all of the far right wing policies and craziness that comes out of that side of our political spectrum. And it's shocking to folks who knew him before because he was a relatively moderate, sort of old school, normal Republican, but he's not anymore.
Well, yours, you said it's a hard state. I mean, yours is a state that's had, fake electors, a militia that attempted to kidnap your governor, and I'm sorry to say, the origin of the big lie out of Antrim County.
Yeah.
So you're up against, no question, you're up against a lot of crazy.
A lot of crazy, and it keeps coming. They double and triple down on the crazy. I was sharing an article with my team today that I read. There is a clerk in the Upper Peninsula who apparently announced that he or she, I'm not even sure what gender, was going to do a hand count and had to hear from our Secretary of State's office, no, you can't actually do that. And I was like, how are we still doing this? But we continue to do this. We continue to have folks here in this state who believe in the lie that there was something nefarious going on in our elections in 20, and there was not, and there is not. These elections are safe and secure, and folks should feel confident that their votes will be counted and counted properly, and hopefully counted a little bit more quickly this time because of the changes in the law that allow our clerks to start processing those absentee ballots before the election night. So we are in good shape in terms of electoral integrity, whether people believe it or not.
Well, and my heart goes out to the people who believe all these lies because they have been subjected to more propaganda more through more channels, through all their social media, through the cable shows they watch. I mean, it is understandable that people who have just heard these lies for years wouldn't, it's not their fault, I don't think. No. But we're going to have a big job to do to try and, after we win, to educate people.
Yeah, my mom taught me empathy, and I cannot imagine how sad it must be for your country if you think these things are true. If you honestly believe that your government and that the folks that you have chosen in your community to manage your elections are cheating, how sad that must be for you and how hard it must be for you to trust. And that's what Donald Trump has done to people in this country. And it is going to be a lot of work for us to come back from that. And I think, Joe Biden started the healing with the way that he has been managing his presidency and running the country. And I honestly think that President Harris will continue that healing.
Yeah, I mean, if Donald Trump has one real superpower, it is that he can destroy trust wherever he goes.
Oh, yes.
Just like don't trust your neighbors, don't trust, and in that world, he kind of makes some sense. But that is really, thank God, not our world.
No, it is not.
So what did you think of the hate fest?
It's not both people's world. Oh my God, at Madison Square Garden?
Yeah.
I have never, and here's the thing. You and I have talked so many times, and there's been so many moments when I have said, I have never. When I have said, there's so much crazy, I can't even describe it to you. But to watch folks stand, and not only in front of a large crowd of people, but in front of cameras, knowing that the world is going to see the words that are coming out of your mouth, and you remain comfortable saying the horrific things that folks said on that stage, was just shocking to me. And I honestly thought I couldn't be shocked anymore, given all that we have been through as a country in this political world. But that night, that hours of people, one after the other, and then Donald Trump called it a love fest. Like that's your definition of a love fest? Maybe because you think everybody in that space loves you, but the hate that was shown to everyone who was not inside that room was horrible. Horrible, and not at all what any of us who believe in this country and believe in our democracy, not what any of us believe about other people, ever. It's so shocking to me.
All right. Well, I love, of course, I am a huge fan of yours for lots of reasons, but one is that you answered that question like a human being. And you gave it like an answer like, what is it? But now I want your answer as a political leader and a strategist. This is their closing message.
Right. No, and this is, as I understand so they're trying to triple down on what they think young white men want to hear. That's what I'm hearing here, right? They think young men want to hear this sort of, I don't believe that to be true. I cannot believe that this is how they've decided to close it out. And the contrast between how they have decided to close this out and how Kamala Harris stood there with the White House in the background, reminding us all that she's going to be the president for everyone. Everyone, whether you vote for me or not, whether you believe in me or not, whether you trust me or not, I am going to be your president, and I'm going to put forth policies for you. And I'm going to be thinking about you. I love her comparison of the to-do list versus the hate list of Trump. Like the contrast could not have been clearer. Yeah, the enemies list. The contrast could not have been clearer. And I can't imagine what kind of political strategist would have sat in a room and suggested that building out that event that way at Madison Square Garden was the way you would close out your campaign. It seems almost like political malpractice to me to do that.
Doesn't it?
It really does. I have to say, Todd, I wonder. Someone will write the book, I am sure, but I wonder what the room is like before these sorts of events happen. Like, what is the conversation they have when they choose to that particular comedian who, as I understand it, was known for that sort of anger and hate, and who I think I understood they went through and they took some things out. They told him not to say some things because they were too far. He went too far. But the things he said, they thought would be okay.
And they loaded them in the teleprompter.
Room?
Yep.
Exactly. Who was in that room making that decision?
Yeah, it's just appalling to think anybody would make that decision, would be in another room making decisions actually about policies to run the country.
Exactly right. That's exactly right. That's exactly
I mean, this campaign season has also seen over in Pennsylvania, Elon Musk offering $1 million a day sort of to a lottery of people who sign his petition. And I want to say as a former Chicago politician, I love that. And I thought, the answer should be Kamala should go to Pennsylvania and immediately tell all her supporters to sign the petition. Like, take his money and vote for me.
That's funny. It is a fascinating tactic because, it is illegal to pay people to vote and pay people to register. So the tactic of sign this petition and I'll draw straws or whatever to pick out the one of you will get $1 million a day. Fascinating to me. I think there may be some questions still about the legality of it, but I like your approach. Everybody go do it. Pick his money.
Yeah. Now, Harold Washington did that when he ran for mayor in Chicago. We had this habit of walking around money on election day. And he used to say, take their money and vote for me. It was fabulous.
He won over and over again. It worked.
Over and over again. Yep. I know we have a day and a half left. If people want to help, they got to do what?
So they need to get on our website and volunteer. If folks know how to use Mobilize, that's even faster. All of our events and all of our canvases and all of our phone banks are on the Mobilize app. Get in there, find a Michigan phone bank. If you're not in Michigan, find a Michigan canvas near you if you can get to Michigan, and come help. The one thing that I think, even the large number of volunteers we have, we can always use more. We have so many voters we need to talk to. We love how our early vote numbers are going. It's strong, but there are still a large number of folks who are going to participate on Election Day or between now and Election Day, and we need them all to turn out for Harris.
Yep.
So as much time as folks can devote to stepping up to help us make phone calls, text messages, any of that, we love it. Please come help.
Okay. You guys heard that. Same everywhere. Pick your state. Come help. Hey,
exactly. Pick your state.
What about the big university campuses? How is the voter registration gone? I know that's a challenge. Are those young people ready? Do they all know how to vote? Are they all, able to do it?
So we've had, strong campus programs on the three big campuses here in Michigan and on the smaller campuses and at the community colleges. We've got, staff. I know. We've got staff on campus who are specifically working for the Harris campaign or for the party, and they have drummed up thousands of volunteers. They are setting up tables all over campus to help people register, to remind people how to register, how to change your registration if you need to. And because we now have same-day registration, folks, I think, we're trying to encourage folks not to wait, because that was part of what happened to us in 22. So many people were in line on those campuses on Election Day. And so they're pushing hard to get these folks registered and voted before Election Day. We've had some great events on campus. We had that lovely rally where both Harris and Walz came to Ann Arbor and did a rally right outside of campus, which drummed up a lot of energy and a lot of support. And I know they got a lot of voter reg happening at that event as well. It's going well.
Remind people how many young people are, in college in the state. I mean, these campuses we say being the big campuses, but they're towns.
They are towns. They're massive, these campuses. And U of M, obviously, in Ann Arbor, and then MSU in East Lansing. They are small cities inside themselves, which means they often get their own polling places because they're big enough to have one or two polling places on those campuses. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about hundreds of thousands of folks in and around that campus who could vote and who could be registered to vote right there where they are, which is why it requires a dedicated staff who are on those campuses doing that work. And then, we've got a competitive U.S. House seat that has the campus at MSU in it. That's Curtis Hertel running in the seat that Alyssa Flotkin currently occupies in Congress. And Curtis and his team have done a magnificent job following in Alyssa's footsteps on campus and organizing and bringing on fellows from campus to work specifically for Hertel and do all of that work on campus. They're dorm storming. They're doing all of the things, anything they can make. They're very creative. I've seen some very creative flyers that these kids have put together. And of course, when we had the MSU versus U of M football game, it became a little competition between the two campuses who can register the most voter. It's a good way to get people fired up to do the work. And these kids they're fired up. I love seeing it. I love feeling it. I think that, if you want to find some hope, go to a college campus and watch how these young people will fight for their democracy right there. It's beautiful.
Yep. We've talked about this before. Your state is also sort of home to the uncommitted movement because of the tensions over battles in Gaza. What's the status of that?
Yeah. So the uncommitted movement officially chose not to endorse, but very clearly told their supporters that Trump is not the answer. Don't vote for Trump, which I think they weren't comfortable saying vote for Harris, but they were very comfortable saying don't vote for Trump. We have been working hard in the communities in and around Dearborn and other places where Arab and Muslim members of our community live. We've got some fellows on the ground who've been working in their own community. We hire people to work in their own communities rather than bringing folks from outside, who've been having, honestly, some tough conversations with folks about this election, about the difference between Harris and Biden and the fear that they should all have of another Trump administration. The conversations are hard, but they are good. My coalition's director, who is himself an Arab American, said to me last night, Lavora, it's feeling much better out here. And that made me feel better. We've had a lot of activity from the Trump campaign. They had got a couple of leading members of the community to endorse. We won't talk about how they got those endorsements, but they did. And they're playing them to all their worth. Trump is in town, coming to town, taking pictures with folks. And then some of the folks who've stepped up to support Harris are seeing some hate thrown at them. And so, we're encouraging folks, like, I don't necessarily need you to publicly support. I need you to vote. And so I feel good that a good number of the members of that community will be supporting Vice President Harris and Governor Walz. They will not all be supporting our tickets, but, they were never all supporting our ticket because this is not a community that's a monolith. Some of those folks are very conservative and were Republicans already. And so we are doing our best. We are not taking any vote for granted, and we're also not giving up on trying to get any vote. We will keep going until the polls close, asking these people to support these candidates and to protect themselves, their family, and frankly, the world from Donald Trump.
You also, I think, are a state with it's so close, with a indigenous population, Native Americans. Yeah. Talk about the outreach there, because I know that's happening around the country too.
It is, and we have, first of all, we have a caucus inside our party. One of the things that we've done is we've structured this party is grow the number of caucuses, specific caucuses for different populations of the state to help us organize inside those populations. So we've got the work of our terrific caucus going on. We've got work going on in the native lands all over the state. We've got we make sure our voter protection hotline has language options for folks. We've got folks who have gone in to do voter registration, of course, and to also do voter protection work and also talk to folks about their right to vote and how to vote and where to vote and all of those things inside all of these communities to make sure that everyone feels comfortable and welcome participating in their democracy. It's funny how much it matters to people, and I know you know this, but I don't think everybody gets it until you feel it, how much it matters to folks that you show up and you ask them to vote. Like, showing up is so important. It matters unbelievably. Show up. Yeah.
So somebody showed me a viral clip of the great tennis player Roger Federer this week, and he gave a graduation speech. And he talked about, he won nearly 80% of the matches he played. I mean, one of the greatest records ever. But he said to the students, I won 80% of the matches, but I only won 54% of the points. I lost nearly as many points as I won. The difference between being a champion and not is just a few points. Mm-hmm. Right? And so when you say a minute ago, you know what? We're not going to get everybody. These communities are diverse. No one's a monolith. No one expects everybody to be on our side. But the work that you're doing in outreach in the uncommitted community, in the cities, in rural Michigan, in the Native American communities, it adds up to winning a few more points, which is all you need.
Really does. It really does. I've heard a list. Exactly. What had happened for so many cycles before I came to the party was that we got very focused on running up the numbers in the urban areas of Michigan because that's where the most votes are. So that's the work that these campaigns would come in and do. And what we realized is work. Exactly. But what we realize is that there are votes for us everywhere. All 83 counties. You've heard me talk about Project 83. All 83 counties. There are votes in each and every one of them. Each of those folks needs to hear from us and hear why it's important that they participate. And when you lose by less in those red areas of the state, it helps the overall. It helps the big ticket. It helps the folks locally feel like they've got a shot at taking back a county commission, at taking back a city council, by taking a drain commissioner seat. All of that adds up to a more democratic, big D democratic, blue state by taking on all of these opportunities all over the state and not ignoring any of them, not letting any of them pass us by. We're out here helping clerks run. We're out here helping, as I said, drain commissioners. We had an extensive school boards program. Like this party believes that we have responsibility to help every Democrat from the bottom of the ticket to the top of the ticket. And we know that when we run strong races at the bottom of the ticket, it helps push out votes that help the top of the ticket.
I love that. I also, it also says that people who are living in communities that are entirely red, they don't deserve the bad governing that they're getting. They just don't deserve it. That they're worthy of going and talking to and saying there's a better future and there are things we can do. That, I know we're a day out from the most important election ever, but we're Democrats. We're going to talk about policies. These Republican policies are shutting their public schools, closing down their rural hospitals. These are not good for people in rural Michigan, not in the least bit.
No, not at all. And you're right. They don't deserve it. And sometimes, getting that knock from someone gives them a neighbor, right? Gives them, people have been talking a lot this cycle about the commission structure, right? Maybe you didn't know that you weren't alone in this community, but because we set up a little office somewhere, because we brought in some volunteers, and those volunteers brought in other volunteers, and it grew, and you start to realize, I've got a little community here, and you know what? Together, this little community can make a change in who's on our city council or who's on our county commission and make a change in some of those policies that are hurting our families and hurting our future. But it all starts with showing up, knocking on the door, making the phone call and saying, what are the issues that are important to you? Here's how Democrats can help.
Well, I am in awe of the work that all of this, you and the state party chairs have done to organize this, this impulse that so many Americans have had to say, I got to do something. And you've said, yep. And we can find a way that you can do it that you're comfortable with. That's led to, I don't know, I think this is the biggest grassroots effort in a presidential election I've ever seen. And on the other side, nothing. I mean, they bought some door knockers, which, as you know, doesn't work very well.
It does not work. It does not work. And they have bought some door knockers. I've had some reports of folks seeing them sort of standing at the bottom of a driveway, not even walking up to the door, and then clicking in their phones like they went inside.
Yep.
Yeah.
One of my favorite experiences with purchased door knockers happened in a mayoral election here in Chicago, where somebody I saw, and I went up to him and I said, okay, I know you're campaigning for X. I can also tell you've been paid. Who are you actually voting for? And this person just laughed and laughed and laughed because he wasn't going to vote for the person who's paying them.
Right. Whereas our 100,000 volunteers are all fully committed to our ticket and believe in it and can stand on that doorstep and tell their own story about why they're doing the work they do. I did a Kansas kickoff with 150 people from out of state, some of them from as far away as California, who came to knock doors last weekend. And they asked me the question, should we tell them we're from out of state? And I said, absolutely. Tell them why you got on an airplane and flew all the way here to talk to them here in Michigan, because that's how important their vote is, that's how important Michigan is, and that's how much you care about making sure that Kamala Harris wins this thing. It's beautiful. Like I live in a state where I can't go anywhere and help other states. I got to stay here. But the idea that I could hop on a plane and go help another state, absolutely, I would love to do it. Would love to do it.
We are one country, after all.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Diverse in all our way. All the ways a place can be diverse. We don't look the same. We bring different cultural heritage. We have different incomes. We have different religions. Something in America holds us together, and it isn't Donald Trump.
No, it is not. It is absolutely not. But the belief in this country that we have built together, immigrants or others who were here before or brought here unwillingly. We built this country together. We believe in this country. And I think that that's a lot of what is driving the energy right now, aside from the fact that, by the way, Kamala Harris is an amazing candidate and highly qualified and will be a terrific president of the United States. We all know that threat that Donald Trump is to what we have built together, what our ancestors helped build. Yeah. And we can't, that when we say we won't go back, we also know that this country was built to keep going forward. We're supposed to grow. We're supposed to change. We're not supposed to go back. We're supposed to learn from what we did in the past. That was wrong, and never do it again, and go forward as a better nation and better people for it.
I am going to let that be the last word because it's so beautiful. Now go, everybody, go vote. Go vote, go vote. Lavora, thank you from the bottom of my heart for this work that you have done, for the work that you have taught other people to do, for the work you've made possible for so many people to do to make our country better.
Thank you. And thank you for always cheering us on. I appreciate it. We feel it. We feel the interest and the love and the encouragement from all over. Thank you. We're going to get it done.
I'll talk to you on the other side.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody. I know a lot is at stake, and honestly, I don't think you can overdo the rhetoric. So let me say this, and I mean it honestly. Anderson Clayton, like Abraham Lincoln, came out of nowhere and tirelessly, courageously, brilliantly started to organize and get people together and get them excited to prove to the world that, government of, by, and for us can survive. Anderson, thank you for joining me here on this last weekend.
Oh, well, thank you for that introduction. It was very, very kind. I appreciate it.
Well, you've done the work. I mean, it's amazing what you've done. And now North Carolina is in play. And, there are a lot of us who are optimistic about what you've done, but you're not only in play for the presidential race, but you could hold on to a very tough House race in the first congressional district and defeat possibly the worst Republican nominee for governor in the country. Talk about that.
Well, North Carolina has definitely seen its fair share of extreme Republicans up and down the ticket this year, whether that be Donald Trump at the presidential level or Mark Robinson, to your point, as a gubernatorial candidate, someone that calls himself, quote, a black Nazi. And I wish I was exaggerating that, but I am not in any way, shape, or form. And who has, went on a tirade across the state about how much could he hate people and become our next governor. And we're really lucky that we've had Josh Stein, who's our current attorney general, running as the Democratic nominee this year, that's run a campaign just about focusing on the issues that are important to North Carolinians across our state, being able to have a good job and access to good health care, which is something that, thanks to Democrats and Medicaid expansion, was able to happen in our state last year. And, no thanks to Republicans that have denied it for the last decade in our state legislature in North Carolina. And so we have the opportunity this year to send a powerful person to our governor's mansion, but also give him a break a Republican supermajority and give him veto power with our state legislature, because North Carolina is still one of many southern states that have gerrymandered maps across racial and partisan lines right now, unfortunately. So we're fighting for a lot this election cycle, but we feel optimistic about being able to defeat people like Mark Robinson and also folks running down the ballot with him in our state legislature too.
I'm worried about something. And I hope I'm wrong, but it seems like having a guy as horrible as Mark Robinson on the ballot might give permission to some Republicans to say, I can vote for Trump because I voted against Mark Robinson. Are you worried that there'll be that kind of ticket splitting?
I mean, I think that we are definitely going to see some of that, but it's maybe not because of the reason that you talked about. I think it's more, which it could be. I'm not or discounting that. I think it's just like what I've seen is that Mark Robinson had little name recognition across the state, and Donald Trump has been a household name for a long time. And I think that, name recognition, whether or not we like it, is still a very powerful tool in politics. And it is something that, he has been made out to be a celebrity, whereas Mark Robinson's name recognition really got started over the last year and also ended in the last year. And I think that it is a different situation of people, but, Donald Trump and Mark Robinson are one and the same. Mark Robinson doesn't exist without Donald Trump, because he is somebody that has enabled people like Mark Robinson, people like Carrie Lake in Arizona, right, to pop up in the Republican Party and especially in Republican primaries. And I think what people have got to take a look at, if you're thinking about it this year, is that, do you want to allow for a person that enables people like that to find themselves trying to run for public office and public service in the future? And is that a party that you want to be a part of? And I think that a lot of people are going to choose to reject that party this year. But, it's not the same Republican Party that we once knew.
Oh, my gosh. I think of the Republicans I've known in Illinois my whole life, including a Republican governor who's still alive and well and who's supporting Kamala Harris here in Illinois. And he is, solid Republican, but that party's dead. The one that's left is the one that threw the Nazi Party, revised the Nazi Party rally in 1939 in Madison Square Garden last week. People in North Carolina can't have looked at that and said that's who we want to be.
No, and I don't think anybody did, right? I mean, somebody that sits up there and calls Puerto Rico garbage and allows for that to be on a national stage like that and harm people in just like very vile ways. Like, people called it a hate rally, which I definitely agreed with. And I think that is something where we've got to look at how Kamala Harris, at least for me, in my state, I had her here just yesterday along with Governor Walz, and both of them just brought a lot of hope and optimism and light and just a real joyous sort of fight to what I feel like we need in the future in the United States and what we want to see as young people going forward, and especially.
So we got one side that is campaigning on not just on hope, but on issues. They're talking about things that they can do to make people's lives better, whether that has to do with taking on drug companies to make medicines more affordable, or taking on corporate greed in order to bring down the price of, like, cornflakes, and cereal. The other side is just saying, you'll feel better if I stomp on somebody else. They've got no message other than hate. I just don't get, would North Carolinians be happy if there were a giant concentration camp, somewhere in the Research Triangle area where they could just stick everybody they find who they think is here illegally until they can deport them. Would that make people happy?
I think what would make North Carolinians, everybody right now really cares about the opportunity to have a job and ability to put food on the table and just your basic human dignity and rights right now. And I think that's what everyday North Carolinians are focused on. And that's what we've been focused on in this election cycle is how do you help people understand that $7.25 is still the legal state minimum wage along with the federal minimum wage in this country? And we need people that want to go in our state legislature and advocate for higher wages and be able to give us that. When Republicans have had control of our state house for the last 20 or 13 years in North Carolina and refused to give a raise wage in any of them. And I'm just that is something that young people right now especially care about. It's something that voters across the state, people that work service level jobs that folks don't actually think are ending up at the ballot box. I always like to talk about our service workers because I think it's such a huge category of people that we miss when it comes to our electorate. But a huge number of people still work jobs at Walmart and McDonald's and do not make $15 minimum wage yet. And it's the entire aspect of living wages is something that we have to talk more about, especially in a place like the South. I know it's not as much of an issue in other places and in other states sometimes, especially in places like Illinois or in New York or in California, but it's especially in places like North Carolina and in the deep South. I'm you still have folks that work for $9 an hour at things, and it's ridiculous, I think.
Well, affordability is an issue everywhere. Housing is very hard to come by in this part of the country. For young people especially, they just don't see how they're ever going to be able to get out of their parents' basements.
I think that's why I'm a very big fan. Kamala Harris's plan to talk about, rent caps and making sure that we are taking on landlords that are price gouging people living in the same conditions and they haven't changed, but their rent is still increasing from year to year, and why that's happening hasn't been explained to them. And I think that the idea of that is something that's really important because in North Carolina right now, our state legislature has a ban on municipalities or cities being able to institute rent caps. And so it is really, I think, the federal government being able to give back some autonomy to even smaller governments with what she's trying to do, because we know that we've seen people, especially in your ex-urban and more suburban and even rural areas, we're seeing gentrification of rural communities because of the counties and population dense areas that we have outside of major cities right now. And it's a lot of those communities are being pushed out and having to expand further because of growth in major metro areas in North Carolina. And so I think it's a huge problem, and she sees that for what it is and wants to take it on to especially help young people, but also just renters in general, which make up a huge demographic of our population right now.
So here you and I are, and it is, the election is upon us, and we're talking about the kinds of issues that people care about, what you have to do to make life better for people. I spent some time listening to Republican radio, to listen to people on the other side talk, and they never talk about how they're going to make life. The conversation you and I just had, it would feel like Mars on one of their channels, because they only talk about, we're going to throw people out. They're eating our dogs. I mean, the difference is, I don't understand why the election's close, but the difference is so vast. I don't think it's ever been this vast. They're different universes.
And they are indeed, but you definitely, I think you still have people that are undecided. You still have people that, I think the idea that we don't understand why people would vote for Donald Trump again is the same sort of rhetoric that we heard in 2016. And to be honest with you, I do get why people voted for him, and in that sense. And I think that unless we do, we can't help people. We cannot ever beat him if we do not understand why people voted for him to begin with. And I think that that is a very important aspect of where our party has got to hold on to, is that everybody is somebody worth talking to about this election. And that is how we have approached a campaign in North Carolina, like trying to make sure that we're talking to every single voter. And this election is close, right? Because like there is so much disinformation that is spread for years and years. And like a lot of times, right, people's first initial response is to believe the first thing that they hear of a story or the first iteration of a story that they hear, not necessarily whether that be the truth. And I think that we have a lot to do as a community and as a country, honestly, to be able to fight back against that. But I do think that the number one driver of like why you do see such a difference between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, the reason why it's close right now is because of disinformation in so many ways.
I completely agree with you and misspoke, and you're right to call me on it.
Not that you misspoke in that sense.
I get it. No, you're right. You're totally right. I do understand why people vote for him, and I think that when we're done and win, journalism is going to be a topic that we have to spend a lot of time on, because Americans, so many Americans do not know what these two candidates stand for here at the end of this race.
We have to have more people like you, Edwin, right? Like out there telling the truth about it. And I think giving people the platform. And a lot of our rural communities have only had one person talking at them for a really long time, you know? And that is something where we're building out and back to.
Yeah, and when truth is behind a paywall, it gives a lot of room for nonsense.
Yeah.
Anderson, talk about, just remind people the size of the effort you've put together. How many people have been out talking to their neighbors? How many doors have you knocked on? How many races that no one was competing in and now have people competing in them? Like, just talk about the magnitude of the effort.
North Carolina is set to break some historic records this year in terms of the numbers that we've knocked as a campaign, as a state party. Over 1 million doors in the state have been surpassed by our coordinated campaign, the Harris-Walz team and the state party here in the state. And so we're really excited about it. And we are contesting 168 out of 170 state legislative seats here in North Carolina. We unfortunately left 44 seats uncontested in 2022. And so we made recruitment a very big priority for us this year, because even under gerrymandered state legislative maps, everybody deserves somebody to vote for, not just against. And we were really excited about that this year. And so a competitive effort was made in that case. And then we are also excited about being on the doors and seeing the fact that over 3 million people have also voted in North Carolina so far. So we are on set to break 2024 or 2020 numbers in 2024, and things are looking great for Democrats in that sense too.
Wow. I mean, that is really amazing. And I mean, you started basically from scratch. I mean, you didn't inherit too much when you started this job.
We did. I think that the cool thing is been able to see how many staff members we've been able to bring on, and the number of just volunteers across the state. And earlier when you were talking about, I was sitting there telling myself that it's not me that's doing all of this. When you were like, it's Anderson, Clayton, and Abe Lincoln, and I'm like, no, it is all the people on the ground. We have such incredible volunteers. We have such incredible candidates. North Carolina is a really unique state because we have we are one out of 11 states that have an election called Council of State, which are 10 statewide races in North Carolina. It's a little bit wonky, but for my political science nerds out there that may be interested in it, we have 15 statewide races in North Carolina this year, from our judicial to our executive branch, and then also to our Council of State races like that, and also at our federal level with Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. And so North Carolina has a lot of really great candidates for people to come out and vote for, and those folks have been across the state this year. People like Wesley Harris running for state treasurer in North Carolina because we elect that position here. I have just been all over the rural parts of the state campaigning and trying to bring, Democrats back out into these areas that we've not been in a long time. And it's really exciting to see the type of ground game that we've seen in all of our rural counties too right now.
I think Democrats have a great message for rural America. I mean, Democrats aren't the ones closing hospitals and schools.
Yeah. I mean, Republicans are also the ones defunding the number one economic driver in your community right now. Yep. And it's like, if they really want your community to survive, they would not be defunding public education. And that is the biggest priority, at least coming out of my General Assembly over the last 2 years in North Carolina, has been sending more money out of public schools into private schools. And doing that through people that could have already afforded to do private school anyway if they wanted to, and did not need government tax dollars to help assist them to do it. And so I think it's one of the biggest right-wing sort of takeovers of the Republican Party that we've seen. A party that once instituted public education in North Carolina and helped do that too and believed in it. It's kind of wild to see them take such a backwards approach to it now.
Here we go again. You and I can't help ourselves. We're going to talk about policy, right? Even in the teeth of closing time of the election, we just can't help ourselves because that's what makes us Democrats.
And also it helps drive people, when young people, especially when they understand the policy that's at stake at the ballot box, they're more inclined to vote. And so I think it is always important to emphasize what type of policies our parties stand for right now, and that is something that's important. So I appreciate you doing that, Edwin, with us.
Hey, you guys suffered this horrific hurricane, and then this horrific hurricane of lives afterwards. Is that how is that going to impact turnout? How is it going to impact the election? Is it going to impact it at all? And how have recovery efforts gone?
I mean, there's not enough words, I think, to describe really what happened with Hurricane Helene in western North Carolina. And our hearts are going out to folks that are still out there recovering and building back. We were just in Asheville yesterday, and we were also in Burke County before that. And so just making sure, checking in with folks and making sure that people are all right. But also a lot of people were out doing wellness checks. The Democratic Party's out there just turned their entire operations for Get Out the Vote into wellness check operations. And Buncombe County Dems, at the leadership of Drew Reisinger, who's the Register of Deeds in that county and is a Democrat, ended up doing 12,000 wellness checks in Buncombe County alone. And so we were just really grateful to everybody that stepped up, communities that came together, the volunteer firefighters, and all of our state and federal responders that allowed for everybody to have such a quick response to the incident that happened, because it took everyone by surprise, right? No one expected western North Carolina to be ravaged by such damage like that.
Yeah.
But election-wise, and I'm sorry, you asked about turnout. My first response is always to get there and talk about recovery efforts, because to your point, I think it's the most important part of that. But election workers across western North Carolina deserve all of our thanks and praise, because out of the 80 early voting polling locations that we had in the over 35 disaffected counties in the western part of the state, a geographical landmass the size of the state of Massachusetts, for anybody that needs to understand that collectively in their heads. But there were 75 out of 80 of the polling locations still open for early vote, which is the stretch that we're in right now, up until November the 2nd. And we still anticipate all of our election day sites to be able to be open as well. But all of our Board of Elections members in our state, whichever have allowed for all of our folks to be able to do different early vote plans if they needed to, and sort of made a special case for the counties that were affected by Hurricane Helene to be able to do drop off early vote or vote in other precincts in other counties if they needed to, and they were disaffected location wise.
Hearing that reminds me of something that I've talked to other people about. I don't think you and I have. In a democracy, the work that people do, when neighbors look at each other and they say, how do we make our community better? They go out and they do politics together, and they do other things together. But so the work that you've done to build, to create on-ramps for the people in your state who care about it to become part of an organization, a political organization mostly, but it also gave them the structure to step in when a disaster struck. And it feels to me like the work that you and others around the country have done to enable citizens to step up about things that matter to them, people who otherwise were sitting at home worrying, but instead could get out and do stuff, that on top of the political impact, which I hope it has a different kind of impact, one that makes communities healthier, that makes communities stronger, that makes people feel safer and more in charge of their lives. And I wonder if you've seen that.
I mean, I definitely think that politics helps people in ways that you couldn't imagine. And I have just seen people step up this year in ways that I couldn't have even thought that they would. And it's just been amazing to see. And so yes, is the answer, I think, to that question. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I just think you build such strong communities that'll last way past this election. Neighbors who've gotten to know each other, neighbors who've shouldered together a burden. They end up being able to make their schools better. They end up being able to build new playgrounds and, stuff that is not political. But because they have seen each other and worked together, they've overcome some of that alienation that has been such a part of America, for the last 20 years.
No, definitely. And I think that what you're going to see is that the election's the easy part. The hard part is when we actually get to the governing afterwards. And that's when we're really going to test whether or not, the unity is something that I think that people utilize to continue coalition building in communities, that we don't always have to agree about everything with the people that we are going into a city council room with or a county commissioner room with, because those are the people that also have our best interest with, like, our interests all align with each other. And that's something that I think we've surfaced in a lot of communities in North Carolina this year, but we've got a long way to go. I think about it and I'm like, 2024 for us only scratches the surface. And I think that we have a good plan for municipal races in 25 and looking at 26's Supreme Court race again, because, our road in our state is a long game in terms of our judicial races. Like, I want to end partisan and racial gerrymandering in North Carolina, and that means that we have got to flip a Supreme Court, which means looking at 2026 elections and 2028 elections, and how do you build on-ramps to continue to educate people about judicial races and the impact that's had on democracy overall in our election system, as it sits in the South in general, too.
Yeah, Anderson, the person I was talking to right before talking to you was Ben Wikler, who had, of course, the exact same path that you're on now. He just got a couple years head start and had to flip a Supreme Court in order to end the gerrymandering there. It can be done.
It can, and I'm lucky because Ben has given such a good roadmap to be able to do it. And North Carolina this year followed a lot of what Wisconsin modeled with Judge Janet, and we're hoping to see that will pan out with Justice Allison Riggs maintaining her seat on the bench in North Carolina, we hope.
Let me ask this terrible question, should never have to be asked, but do you have any concerns in North Carolina about making sure the votes get counted on time, get counted honestly, certified, and all of that?
No, we have every faith in our elections process and our folks that are running our elections right now in North Carolina. And our Board of Elections members have done a fantastic job in making sure that any of the issues that we have flagged, that our hotline has come in and brought in. I mean, you are always going to have You've got everyday folks are running our elections. I always like to remind people of that, too. You definitely have people out there that can make mistakes, and so that will always be the case. But there is allowed for human error in an election in the sense of, somebody. We, at one point in time last year, had somebody get turned away from a polling location because the poll worker thought their ID was not one of the right ones, that it was a valid ID for their student ID in that sense. And it was. And so, they called the voter protection hotline that we have in North Carolina. and we told them they should be able to go back and vote. And I mean, like, incidences like that have happened, but making sure that people understand their rights and know them when they go into the ballot box is also one of the most important education games that we could be playing, and trying to make sure that we help educate all of the poll workers and across the state that, Republicans have been instituting a lot of policies over the last, year, right, to make it harder for people that have worked the polls for cycle after cycle to have to institute new things at the ballot box. And voter ID is just one of those.
And some states, people are worried about violence and intimidation. Folks who show up, you see any indication that's going to be an issue for you?
I mean, it is definitely a heightened sense, especially in rural communities right now, about you've got Trump folks outside of polling locations and such like that. But Democrats have just tried to make it so that we've had a bigger presence this year across the state, and any place that we have heard of any type of like outside the polling location, sort of harassment in the parking lot, we've reported it, and we are just trying to keep on track with that.
Yeah. And look, I mean, Trump folks, like our folks, they're entitled to be out there. And we should expect to see them and wave at them and say hi. They're our neighbors, after all. And then go and vote against their guy. Just, I think, what's going to happen. Anderson, is it too late? I mean, we got 2 more days. What can people do?
No, it's not too late. It's not too late until the last little minute of voting is done, which is on Election Day at 7:30 p.m. in North Carolina. So if you've got time to help us out, if you are interested in getting involved with voter protection efforts in the state, we are going to be doing ballot chasing, ballot curing, and all of that jazz. So if you're interested in getting involved with that, ncdp.org is where you can go. And I should have said that slower probably because of my accent, but if you Google the North Carolina Democratic Party, you'll find our website. Kat Lawson, who's our voter protection director, has been phenomenal. And also, if you're interested in getting out and making phone calls with us, or if you want to buy that last minute flight and come to North Carolina and help us out, we're always more than welcome to put you up in a nice little place to stay. So you let us know.
All righty. And where are you going to be election night?
I'm going to be in Raleigh. My dad, I'm working the polls on Election Day because my dad is running for county commissioner in Person County, where I grew up. And he filled one of my He filled one of my hard-to-win seats this year because Person County is an R+20 county. But I'm really grateful for my dad for doing it because he stepped up to make sure that democracy was upheld this year, and we're proud of him for it. So I'm going to work a polling site for him that day, and then I'm going to head to Raleigh for our watch party that night with all of our council state candidates, and I'm very excited to have, hopefully Josh Stein win our governor's race, which we think is looking good right now, but also us take our council state and win a Supreme Court seat and break a supermajority in North Carolina, and we'll be doing all right on election night.
You'll be doing all right, maybe even deliver us a president.
We hope so, that too.
Yeah. Well, listen, thank you again for spending time with us here in the Upper Midwest and sharing what's going on down there. And, bless you for everything. It's just fabulous what you've done.
No, thank you for everything that you're doing, too. We really appreciate it.
Talk to you on the other side.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Sam Levine is back with us. I can't tell you how grateful I am that he spent as much time as he has with us while he's doing this unbelievably important reporting that, may result in saving our democracy. I mean, talk about the power of journalism. Sam, welcome back.
Thanks so much for having me, Edwin.
Hey, look, this is the last show I'm having before the election, and you and I've talked for years now about election obstruction. And last time we were on, we went through that really carefully. But I thought a little summary now. You wrote this wonderful piece, The Big Lie 2.0, and I wonder if you would just sort of summarize some of the things that are going on. Afterwards, we can talk about some of the defense that's been mounted to make sure that that an election isn't stolen. And then if there's any time after that, just talk about some particular risks of cases that might end up before the Supreme Court.
Well, I think there's little doubt that Donald Trump is preparing to contest an election loss. Let me say that. I think there's little doubt that Donald Trump is preparing to contest the election if he loses. He's already signaled clearly that he's preparing to do that. The Republican National Committee and other allied groups are filing litigation, laying the groundwork to do so. And there's little doubt in my mind that we should expect this election to be over on November 5th. I think there'll be, several days of ballot counting and a protracted period of litigation after that. And this effort to contest the election is a multi-pronged effort. First, we've already seen Donald Trump seeding the groundwork to claim that the election was stolen. We saw it in Pennsylvania the other night. I was at his rally in Allentown where he said there's cheating in Lancaster County. And he was distorting an investigation into voter registration forms to claim that there was ballot fraud. For months, the Republicans have claimed that non-citizens are voting in elections, could be voting in elections, which is obviously false. That's been debunked numerous times. And I think that if Trump loses, this is all stuff that we're going to see him use to try and contest the results.
Sam, let me ask 1 second there. On the notion of non-citizens voting, I saw this week that a Russian fake set of video, I guess, of Haitians voting, it's a complete fake, has been running on X, and Elon Musk was asked to take it down and will not. This plays in to the very thing you're talking about.
That's right, and I should note that Elon Musk in particular has been a very powerful vector for spreading misinformation about elections, specifically this lie about non-citizen voting. He's accused Democrats of importing non-citizens into the country, which is obviously untrue, is also very closely linked to this racist idea of the great replacement, that non-whites are being imported to replace a white majority in the United States. So it's unsurprising to me that he wouldn't take that down.
Yep. I didn't mean to stop your train of thought, but I thought it was worth putting that piece inside.
Yeah, I think the non-citizen voting effort is, one central theme that Republicans will use to create this narrative to contest a possible election loss. And, I think that the lawsuits that the Republican National Committee are filing, a lot of them are frivolous lawsuits. The claims are pretty weak. A lot of them have been thrown out of court. But I'm not convinced that the point of these lawsuits is actually to win them before the election. A lot of them raise claims that could have been raised years ago. Lawyers are filing them knowing that they're unlikely to succeed on the eve of the election. And I think instead what they're designed to do is just generate this impression that there's something wrong with the voter rolls, or there's something wrong with the way that swing states are running their elections. And, several lawyers I've spoken to have said what they think that this is an effort to sort of give these claims of fraud a false imprimatur of legal authority, that instead of someone just tweeting it, now it's an illegal document. There might be affidavits attached. It, has a court stamp on it. So it just looks a lot more official and a lot more believable. But when you drill down into some of the claims in these suits, a lot of them are just as frivolous as if someone had tweeted them. There's a law professor, Justin Levitt, who says that a lawsuit without a provable claim is just a tweet with a filing fee. And I think that's a pretty good way of describing what we've seen in a lot of these lawsuits.
I love that line of tweet with a filing fee. I'm writing that down. So Sam, it looks like this strategy boils down now to making the election as messy as possible. But in every jurisdiction that I have looked into, people seem ready to hold a normal election. Voters are ready to vote. The poll workers, they all largely come from the communities that are voting. They're your neighbors. They live down the street, but they are, spending the day checking ballots. This seems, obviously there'll be a couple mistakes made. There always are, but nothing that changes any results. And it just looks like we're about to have another free and fair election, notwithstanding all the efforts to pretend it's something else and actually to cause it to be something else.
That's right, Edwin. There is little doubt in my mind, zero doubt in my mind, that this is going to be a free, successful, and fair election. Every election official that I know in the United States is fully committed to ensuring that this election is conducted fairly, accurately, and that people can have confidence in the results. And I am very confident that they will be able to do that. There is little doubt in my mind that the person who wins this election will be seated in the White House next year. But I think you're right that, elections in the United States, not a lot of people know this, but, they're administered at the local level. So that means there are thousands of election offices, some of whom, have very few full-time employees. They've been under-resourced for years. It's been well reported that many election officials are leaving the profession. There are a lot of people who are going to be running their first presidential election, and there will be mistakes. There are mistakes in every election. Something gets entered in a spreadsheet the wrong way. Something gets uploaded the wrong way. A batch of ballots gets entered later than it should have. These are typical mistakes that obviously are unintentional, have no effect on the results of the election. But we're in an environment now where any one of those mistakes can get quickly amplified to be evidence of, false evidence that there is wrongdoing or malfeasance in the election and feed a narrative that the election is being stolen. So I'd expect that, any little error that we see from any election official, especially in a battleground state, will be evidence to claim that the election was stolen.
Yeah, and we're going to see evidence that doesn't even exist because of the fakes that we now see going around. So, but let's assume we get through the election. There's an effort for some to delay certification, to cause mischief after the votes are cast. But similarly there, it looks like we've done a very good job of protecting that part of our voting system as well.
That's right. For years, there's been little attention paid to the certification process, the process after Election Day when, all the ballots are counted and discrepancies are resolved and, the borderline ballots, if there's a question about, who the intent to vote for was, those get adjudicated. That's all done in the week or so after the election, and then the results get certified. I think this time around we're going to see an enormous amount of pressure on local election officials not to certify the vote should Trump lose the election. I think that's an important caveat, by the way, that, we're talking about Trump contesting an election should he lose. I think it should not be lost in the conversation that this is a very close election, and either candidate could win the election.
Yep.
And it's a complete toss-up.
Yeah.
But, on the certification process, I think at the local level, should Trump lose, there'll be a lot of pressure on Republicans in those positions not to certify the vote, to They might be a minority on a Democratic-controlled board to withhold their vote from certification. And, that's a very dangerous thing. I think legally it will be unsuccessful. The laws are pretty clear that, these boards have a responsibility to certify, and that if a candidate wants to contest a vote, that happens in a legal context outside of certification. State laws allow for that. But even if these efforts to not certify don't work, I think what it does is it further seeds doubt in the minds of people who question the election result. And if boards are forced to certify, it fuels this narrative that something is being stolen, that an election result is being forced on supporters of the losing candidate. And I've mentioned this before, but I think that is extremely dangerous and corrosive to our democratic system. If you think about the fundamental premise of a democracy is that, people believe that their representatives legitimately elect them. And if you think about the fundamental premise of a democracy, it's that people believe that their representatives legitimately represent them. They're legitimately elected. And when people start to lose faith in that, when they don't believe that, I think it's very, very corrosive to our system of government.
Ooh, and where we saw already once, it leads to political violence.
Right.
Sam, this week the Supreme Court allowed Virginia to bulk throw people off the ballot in an effort to be sure that no one who isn't a citizen votes. This was one of those decisions that they make without issuing any reasoning. They just said that's the way it is. I worry that if somehow this comes down to one state and there is litigation and it goes to the Supreme Court, that the results of the Supreme Court, that the Supreme Court could put a heavy hand on this. Are there cases that you foresee that might get to the court?
Yeah, I think in Pennsylvania there are ongoing disputes about what remedies should be available to voters who have an error on their mail-in ballot. In Pennsylvania, if you return a mail-in ballot but don't sign it or don't date it or don't put it in the secrecy envelope, there's been long-running disputes about whether a voter has the right to cure their ballot, fix the ballot before Election Day, whether they should be allowed to cast a provisional ballot in person. And those all have been, floating around in the courts, going back and forth for the last, couple months. And I think that is one to definitely watch that could wind up before the U.S. Supreme Court. And, we know that Pennsylvania is a key state in this election, maybe the key state in this election, and it's expected to be incredibly close. So even if it's just, a marginal number of ballots that are affected by these decisions, that could wind up making a big difference.
Yeah, that is my biggest worry. All these other efforts to interfere, to make the system not work. You and I, your reporting has been clear, and we've talked about this, that it looks like we are going to have a free and fair election, but that there will be disputes about it, and those disputes may or may not be adjudicated in a nonpartisan way. That is my greatest fear at this point. But you keep raising something else that should probably scare me more, and that is that once again, should Harris win, a chunk of the population won't believe it, and they'll believe that it is a mess, and it'll be the responsibility of the new government to prove its legitimacy, I guess. But that seems an extra burden that Joe Biden had to bear, and Kamala Harris would have to do it as well. It seems massively difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I think listen to what Trump is saying on the campaign trail. He's saying the only way we'll lose is if they cheat, and they're already cheating. Really priming his supporters to believe that there is no legitimate universe in which his opponent can win the election, and I think that's a very dangerous thing.
But he's also saying other things that are dangerous and crazy. They're eating your neighbor's dogs, or if I lose, the Jews are to blame, or Liz Cheney should be looking down the barrel of 9 rifles. Just such. I mean, you and I focus on what he says about elections, but in context, he's saying crazy things about everything. And maybe that's a context that can help us after he's off the stage, calm this down.
I mean, I think certainly his comments about elections and voting fall into a wider context of alarming things that he has said. I think, prosecuting your enemies as well as, underlying other, racist and other claims that he's made, including the ones that you mentioned, Edwin. But, maybe it's my beat, but, I think there's something particularly corrosive when you talk about democracy and elections. I think we're used to heated political rhetoric in the United States. We're used to nasty campaigns. We're used to distortions in political ads. Not saying that any of those are healthy or good or excusable, but they are part of a messy democracy.
Yep.
But when you start questioning whether your opponent can legitimately win, when you start framing it as if the system of the election itself is broken and rigged, I think there's something uniquely dangerous about that, because that to me goes beyond rhetoric. That's really getting at something very fundamental about our system, and something that will continue, should he lose the election. So I think it's extremely, extremely dangerous.
I do too. And it is, now America seems comfortable calling, using the fascist word, calling it fascist. Certainly his rally in New York, the sort of reprise of the 1939 Nazi rally, didn't dissuade anyone from talking that way. So it's dangerous for the soul of our country. I'm not sure it's dangerous in that it will change the result of the election. I worry more about the Supreme Court than an angry population when it comes to assuring that the result of the election is honored. Am I wrong in thinking that way?
I mean, look, I think one way of thinking about it is that in 2020, there was a case that went before the Supreme Court asking it to overturn the election. This is a case that the Attorney General of Texas brought, essentially asking the Supreme Court to throw out, legitimate electoral votes from, the key swing states. And the Supreme Court turned that away pretty quickly. And no noted dissents, didn't really entertain the cases, as far as we know, in any serious way. And the composition of the Supreme Court hasn't changed since that happened. The conservative majority on the Supreme Court hasn't changed since that happened. Ketanji Brown Jackson has obviously joined the court since then.
I take some comfort in that, but I'm also scarred from Bush v. Gore, where they stopped the count.
Right. I think that's right. I don't think that there isn't reason to be scrutinizing of the Supreme Court, to be, alarmed by the way that they have, deferred to Donald Trump, in recent litigation, particularly in the immunity case, and a lot of their voting litigation, frankly. A lot of the voting cases that have come before the Supreme Court, have been decided in a way that has benefited Republicans. So, I've said this before, that I don't think that the Supreme Court is going to go down a rabbit hole chasing fringe theories like the ones that came before it in 2020. But I think that if there was a legitimate sort of policy dispute over ballots, something like, should undated ballots count, or should these provisional ballots count, or, should late arriving ballots that aren't postmarked count? That's when I think, and if the decision could, somehow affect the election, that's when I think, that there could be a more pro-Trump bias that comes into play.
Yeah. Well, Sam, you and I will probably next talk after the election, and maybe during the period where some of the disputation about what it meant is still ongoing. And I am so eager to read what you write as you look at, how Americans are coping with the reality of the vote, whatever it is, and how the system is holding to make sure that it is the Americans' will that determines who sits in that office. We have about 2 minutes left, and I would love you to say, if you're willing, what this journey has meant to you, just this beat that you've been asked to cover and that you have done so well on. It's got to have felt terrifying, important at times. And can you talk about that?
Sure. Well, I started covering this beat after the 2016 election, and I was at the Huffington Post at the time, and it was when there was a lot of dispute about things like voter ID laws, gerrymandering, voter purges. Those were all issues that were coming to the Supreme Court in sort of blockbuster cases. And when I first started covering this beat, people would sort of look at me and say, there's enough on voting rights for it to be a whole beat. They were sort of puzzled that it was something that deserved its own attention. And I think that the 2020 election really has reframed that idea for a lot of people. And there's little question that, democracy, attacks on our democracy, efforts to subvert our democracy are, one of the most important stories happening right now, and deserve their own area of coverage outside of politics as its own beat. So, I think it's been, still feels like the beat is changing a lot, and but I continue to believe deeply that, when you're talking about elections and how people feel towards the people that represent them, there's no more important story in America to be covering.
Yeah, well, you do it well, Sam. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to talking to you post-vote.
Thanks so much. Anytime, Edwin. Happy to do it.
You're looking at the big picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Donna Ladd is the founder, executive director, and editor of the Mississippi Free Press, as well as the Jackson Free Press. Now, I can hear all of you listening and scratching your heads, wondering why the very last person I'm going to talk to on this show before the most consequential election anyone can remember is someone from a red state that no one in the media has paid any attention to this cycle. But look, everybody, there are patriots in those red states, and they deserve our attention and more than a little respect. Win or lose, we are actually all in this together. Donna, thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
I read your October piece, the one titled, "As Fascism Looms, the Free Press Must Stand and Report in the Breach." And that got me reading some of your other pieces and then learning a little bit about you and your remarkable life. So before we just leap in and talk about politics, will you tell us a little bit about your own journey?
Oh man, that's an essay question, but I'll hit the high points. I'm from Neshoba County, Mississippi, Philadelphia, which many of your listeners have heard of, I'm sure. I was 3 years old when Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner were murdered by people I would, in some cases, kind of related to, but certainly knew or would know as I got older. And I didn't know about that until I was 14. Mm-hmm. And even then, just because of a kind of bad CBS TV movie. But what it did was awaken me, first of all, to want to understand, the role that my town and the people around me had played in history, and to just be informed about that history. And I was also really mad about it because I wasn't being taught my own state's history, my own people's history. And so that really kind of has informed everything I've done. I mean, I ran from Mississippi the day after I graduated from Mississippi State, saying I would never live here again. And I kind of had a journey of dropping out of law school and getting into journalism. But I was always drawn to really local community journalism. And eventually, long story short, when I went to Columbia to get my master's degree in journalism when I was 40, my advisor sent me back to Mississippi to report on race for the first time that I had reported here. And that just kind of changed my life. And I decided to move back to Mississippi after I graduated. 9/11 happened, and my partner Todd and I decided to put down roots in Mississippi and got this crazy urge to start a local, what was then called an alternative newspaper, the Jackson Free Press, dedicated to the notion, though, that it was going to be actually inclusive in coverage and readership. And that's where this whole journey began in 2002. And here we are. I mean, the Mississippi Free Press and the Jackson Free Press are named after a civil rights movement newspaper that Medgar Evers and a multiracial group of people did here in the 1960s. Yeah. And so we kind of feel like we're trying to carry on, the tradition that was kind of born then.
Donna, I love that story. I love it. I mean, Philadelphia, Mississippi is not as well known as it should be for that history, or for its subsequent use by Republicans as a dog whistle stop. I think it's where Ronald Reagan made his announcement, after all, about states' rights. It's a fascinating history. And the fact that you were angry that you weren't told the truth, and then you were determined to be a truth teller, is, I think, so hopeful, because so many Americans on so many different topics are being lied to today. And I think someday they're going to be angry about it.
Well, yeah. I mean, one of the first things I started to learn when I left Mississippi, kind of over time, was that Americans are lied to about our race history and the things that happened all across the nation are from Mississippi. Now, I'm not one of those apologists who try to say, "Oh, racism happened everywhere." I'm a truth teller about my own state, as you know, but everybody needs to do that, and we need to understand how all these pieces fit together. And so many of these pieces of our history, as a nation, and also in relation to other horrible things that went on, including what led to World War II. These are things that we all need to acknowledge instead of kind of live in this, through this amnesia, this historic amnesia that I think teaches Americans that these things can't happen here, such as I wrote about in that fascism column. they do happen here, or they can happen here, and people here contribute to these things happening here and covering up our history, even and maybe especially the race terrorism, the white terrorism that has happened in, really every state in this nation in various ways in our history. This just teaches us to be naive Americans. And so you get someone like, Trump, but also the people around Trump, who come along and just try to, they take advantage of this ignorance that we have about our own history and what that can do. And that's something that I think because of what happened in my hometown and not being told, I just won't play along with that, and I think, and here in Mississippi, I don't think there's a better place to tell these stories from, even if it surprises people.
It's fabulous. I mean, the ignorance about our history has become doctrine on the right. The Trump administration, when he was president, pushed something called the 1776 Project, and they pushed out a so-called official history of the United States that was willfully ignorant of everything you were talking about.
Well, that's right. And this is not a new thing. This is if you study the history that I study, it's like, and this was happening across the nation all through the 20th century, was this kind of, through all the immigration laws and through, the dalliances with Hitler and eugenics and all of these things that was happening in this country too. It's like it's our history is there, but then it's hidden from us. So it people are taught not to believe that these things happened here, ever happened here, or can happen here. And I think that's what's so frustrating to me, is that people are so taken advantage of, but so many people are willful about their ignorance. And I don't just mean in the South, and I don't just mean in red states. It's just that in certain states like mine, it becomes easier to convince people. And then you do these campaigns against teaching history that are just everywhere we look. And it's infuriating. And frankly, it's terrifying.
Yeah. I mean, we had the myth of the lost cause and the proliferation of statues, 40 years after the Civil War, of Civil War generals from the South. And we've had similar lies about our history in every state, as you point out, frequently not just about our experience with Black Americans, but certainly with the indigenous population as well.
Right.
Just, horrific ignorance on purpose. Well, but I don't want to limit it that way. Or the way we treated labor unions, or the way we treated, white immigrants from Southern Europe. I mean, we have a whole history that is two things. It is aiming for something wonderful and hating every minute of getting there.
Yeah, right. And also, I mean, you mentioned the statues. I've written a lot about the Confederate statues and all of the kind of Confederate obsession for years. But then, as a lot of the kind of recent research and such that I've been doing in the last decade or so, so many of our Ivy League institutions participated in eugenics in so many ways and pushed those ideas and, are named. I mean, the things named in Cambridge, Massachusetts for eugenicists, are shocking when you actually start to study that. And, who our institutions across the country are named for. And again, that doesn't take anything from the problems of the Confederate obsession. But one of the things that I preach is that, we have to, as Americans, we just need to look at it all and kind of understand that this is why the doors end up open for what we're dealing with now, is because we are just so naive in many ways. After World War II, there was such an amnesia about a lot of the things that were happening in this nation before World War II, right? The Klan, the second Klan, was just, and that it was like wealthy business people and leaders across the nation who were the core of the second Klan in the 1920s. And just, what Birth of a Nation did as a film to our nation. All of this, it's so important for us to face it all and connect those dots. And it's for someone from Mississippi, I've observed this so much in my life, is that so much of the nation wants to dump it all at our footsteps. There's and not just Mississippi, but red states or more conservative states that in so many ways have been controlled by these forces in such dramatic ways through, voting laws and just so many and intimidation. And so they, and then they want to boycott us, because they only want to think of us, like here in Mississippi, the blackest state, that almost half of Mississippi, votes against most of our leaders. We, in 2011, we as a state voted down personhood, which had all of the stuff, including IVF and all these other things. We voted it down, and the political strategists immediately forget about that here. And that was something that we did, with parties coming together. And so, I don't know, it's just frustrating as a Mississippian, to watch people throw up their hands and then just fixate on a place like Mississippi instead of helping us, and helping those of us who have the voices, and in whatever way, like you are doing, you're having this interview with me, and raising our voices about Mississippi, and then just look down at us, instead of saying, okay, we got to work together as a nation. I think I'm hearing more of that now, like during this, I'm seeing some things happen. Yeah. Kind of in the Harris campaign, I don't really, that's really kind of trying to widen the possibilities of people working together across divides, and across different states.
Donna, I mean, Americans we'll never be a nation of historians. We'll never spend a lot of time looking backwards. So I don't fault people for not trying harder to understand our past. I really fault people for intentionally lying about our past in order to make our present more complicated. I mean, Chicago, just because I'm standing here, was, I think, home to the largest Klan chapter in the 1920s. Yeah, so
well, certainly one of them. Yeah. Yeah.
I am, painfully aware of our own history up here, its violence, and certainly the way when we had the Great Migration, when Black Americans came here, how they were used politically and economically. Yeah. I mean, this is not a South only history. It is an American history. Right.
And it's systemic history. Yeah.
Yes, it is. And it's very complicated. But, the things that you talk about, I guess I have thought this election a long time was not simply about, oh my gosh, we have to stop this crazy man and his fascist instincts, but rather, I mean, that's the negative, and we do have to stop him. But I've thought, and I wrote about this, 3 years ago, that we are close to becoming the first truly large, multiracial, multi-faith democracy where the power is actually shared. We've always been multiracial. We've always been multi-faith, but the power was never shared. No one in the world has ever done that. It was never going to be easy. right? I mean, this is a third birth of freedom for our country, and it's going to be as hard as the first two. And there were always going to be forces arrayed against it, but there were also always going to be people who understood that that was what we were birthed to do in this nation. And then when I read your stuff, I get that feeling that, you know, and you're fighting that fight in Mississippi, and there are other people fighting it around the country. This sense that we can't divide ourselves from each other on the most difficult issues and then move forward. We have to get over that hump and understand we're in it together.
Well, yes, and I think that's exactly it, because the division, you know, just this kind of the red-blue thing. I mean, one of the things you'll figure out about me, and if you read me enough, is that I'm not a big party fan. You know, this whole either-or binary kind of thinking that we get into. That doesn't mean that I'm not critical of bad parties or bad people, as you know. But it's like we can't assume that we get there by either ignoring our history, and especially not just the history, but the outcomes of it, by teaching what it looks like, why things are the way they are now in all of our cities and across the country. You know, I'm such a history nut, particularly around these issues, and a project I'm working on. But it's like when I go to cities, I research their history. You know, we were recently in Dallas, and just where my partner Todd grew up, and all this history he didn't know, this race history about his own city. And it's, we do it to understand, you know, how things got the way they are, but to try to see a path forward. Because if people don't know the role that their own people or their own area played in putting these power systems in place, I think it's very hard to dismantle them, because then they say, "Oh, that was those awful people over there or down there in Mississippi or wherever," and we don't work together well as a result of that. And it's part of the reason for us and my team. You know, I have a great team, and most of them grew up in Mississippi, and a number of them I trained into journalism. Because of who they are as people. And they're not trying to go live somewhere else. They're trying to do really stellar truth-telling work from Mississippi, because we really believe what Martin Luther King and others said. You know, they said it in different ways, but it doesn't work if you ignore a state like Mississippi and its people and its history. You've got to put all that together.
One of the things that my perusal of history teaches me is that the divisions, these racial divisions in America, they're sort of not natural. They get encouraged, and they get encouraged in order to stop us from making progress economically. That
right.
Wealthy slave owners taught poor white folks in the South that their interests lied with them rather than with other folks who were economically challenged or enslaved. And we've seen that time and time again. And I wonder now whether we are finally getting to the point where, once again, because of the way we've done economics in America for at least the last 30 years, this small, tiny group that holds so much of all of the wealth of this nation is waking up everyone now finally across ethnic and racial lines to say we really have more in common, and we've really contributed an awful lot more than we're getting the benefit of together.
Well, you know, what I would say is I hope so. You know, I'm encouraged, like, you know, when Obama won, the thing I said to the people around me is that white supremacy is not dying this easily. Y'all buckle your seatbelts. And then I believed that Trump would win in 2016 for various reasons. And, you know, so I'm hopeful, that this ideology of hate and division fails next week, right? And that this is the moment, and that we overcome, at least most of us in the nation, or enough of us in the right states, overcome that very intentional division that's been economic and racial and the misogyny and all of the things. And I am very hopeful, more hopeful than like in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
But it's rough. And I'm not going to end this on a negative note at all. I'm not headed there, but it's tough though, because we wasted a lot of time not talking about a lot of this and allowing the media to the national, talk media and all of that to not talk about things very intelligently, and to actually divide us in many cases, for their own he said, she said.
Well,
so I'm hoping.
I'm sorry, you brought up this topic just now, and it's the topic of journalism itself. And journalism is also one of the issues of this campaign, not spoken about by the candidates so much, but it's disastrous failures to tell the truth in this campaign. And I'm just reminded that at other points in our history, when major the equivalent of major media companies in their era faced technological changes and challenges in trust, new entrants showed up in the market and became the major journalism organizations. And I think local journalism is the only way to build trust. What you do builds trust in your community. If you say, Edwin came down here and he opened a restaurant on Main Street, people can see it with their own eyes. What you write and what their lived experience, it's community affirming. Whereas when the national news tells some political story, and the example I use is like what happened in a bedroom 30 years ago between a Supreme Court nominee and a college professor when one of them was drunk. And you know what? I mean, who knows? Who can ever really know it? It isn't, it's bias affirming. It's not community affirming. So I think the future's in what you do.
Yeah, I mean, me too, obviously. And, and the fact that we don't answer to these overseers, if you will, these corporate overseers. And I use that word very intentionally here. But I do too. I mean, they are funny. I mean, we've been lectured for, at the Mississippi Free Press for putting by a journalism expert in the Northeast to stay in our lane, because we featured the story that what Trump said about NATO several months ago. We featured it on the top of our website. He literally said to us, leave it to the New York Times and the Washington Post. And our answer is, most of our people who read us don't read the New York Times and the Washington Post in Mississippi. They're paywalls. We have a really inclusive audience. We are reaching people they do not reach. And they also need to know the dangers of, such as was in that story, or as I wrote in this essay that you're talking about fascism and the use of fascist language and all that. And so you're right. It would build trust through the local things that we do, which isn't just negative reporting, which, about problems, but it's also lifting up the joy and the successes of Mississippians in a state where everybody dumps on us all the time. And so we build trust through that we can then use to say, you know what, we get to talk about what's going on in the country too, and how that affects Mississippians. And there's some, within our in the journalism world right now, there are plenty of people that wishes we local outlets just didn't, worry our pretty little heads about those things. Yep. And, we hear conversation about it and we just kind of reject that. It's like I made a joke on Twitter or X or whatever the hell it's called, but about recently about, it's the New York Times and the Washington Post, and, we are the Mississippi Free Press. We could talk about it, too, if they could talk about it in New York and Washington. It's like there's this idea that we're supposed to stay quiet.
Well, I hate to say it, it's a reflection of some terribly snobbish attitudes from those folks about your state, but it's also just plain sexist BS.
Yeah.
I hear stay in your lane from men to women far more than than you would hear it from a swimmer trying to get down a swimming pool.
Well, let me tell you, the same guy in the same blog post told us to stick to our knitting. So you want to talk about sexist.
Yeah, so we're going to find this year that your lane leads to the White House. That's just the way this year. That's the way it is.
Well, I don't know. That's it. It's like I actually, for us, it's about democracy, and I really mean that. Not just because we're nonprofit, and don't as an organization, kind of stay out of that two-level, that two-sided partisan fray. We just want to report the truth. And so much truth isn't reported in that two-sided fray. They it's false equivalency and all these things that at least we're talking about more as a nation now and pushing back on these outlets for. And I tell you, this idea of these outlets, you don't have to endorse, but to suddenly have your billionaire owners come through and say, oh, you put all this work into these endorsements and fact checks right before the election, and no, we're not going to let you do it at the last hour. That is blatant power.
It is what it looks like, isn't it? Sometimes it is just what it looks like.
Exactly what it is. It is exactly what it is. And that's the power structure. I'm sorry, I'll use the phrase. That is the power structure that we all have inherited that is just pushing back. Just frankly, just like the guy telling us to stay in our lane. He didn't think about it that way, but that's what you're doing, dude. When you're telling us, patting us on the head and saying, y'all down in Mississippi, you don't need to be talking about these national hard things. That's absurd.
Yeah. Well, so when you mentioned Barack Obama's election, and it was powerful and meaningful and created a huge backlash. And I always thought, doing it the first time, when something happens once, it's meaningful. But it's when it happens a second time that it becomes normal, that it becomes like, okay, this is where we are now. And now we have to deal with it. Yeah. And I think that's a profoundly important milestone to hit. The idea that a woman is going to be president, and I say that could be president, isn't, I don't think, controversial so much as it is overdue. Way overdue. So, and not because we need a woman president, but because it's absurd we just haven't had one.
Yeah, right. And the reasons we haven't had one are absurd, because it's misogyny and all those other things. Right. Yeah. I agree.
Well, listen, this is the way, I've talked about, this is a political show. I talk to journalists all the time, respect journalists, do not believe that you should be partisan. I believe you should be truth tellers. You're the last person, though, that I'm talking to after a year of talking only about this election. And there's a reason for that. I want people to understand what it means, what we're going through, and what it could mean for the country. And if Kamala Harris wins, what is that going to mean for the people that you work with every day in Mississippi?
Wow. My partner in the Mississippi Free Press is Kimberly Griffin, a Black woman from Mississippi. She's the publisher, and she worked with us a long time at the Jackson Free Press. She's an AKA. I've been seeing a lot of pink and green ever since Harris announced. But, I think what it means, if you can't. I'll talk about that piece of it first. It's like, I think what a Harris win would mean is, to so many people, is just this broadening of acceptance and of having the potential to be given your due, to be treated like you can do anything. And, if you work hard enough, and if you do you do the things you need to do and toughen yourself, to the point that you can take the blows. And that's one of the things she's displaying now, is how to be tough, right? Mm-hmm. And no matter what, but at the same time, be tough and joyful, because people in Mississippi, especially the people that really admire our work, and don't just whine about us all the time. The people who admire our work understand that there's so much joy in what all of us do every day. And that's part of it, is that we love our state and we love it enough to fight for it. And we, and we'll take the blows. Like I could shut up, and not say some of the things I say, but that's not how you maintain a democracy. And it's also because, so many people said, Bob Moses, one of my heroes, said this in the church in Mount Zion in Neshoba County. He reminded us, that freedom is a struggle. And it's always going to be a struggle. Yeah. We can never achieve freedom and then it's all over, because the whole point of freedom is to keep fighting for it.
It's not a noun, it's a verb.
That's right. And that's the people around me know that. Yeah. And it transcends partisanship. This is what's important about it, is that it transcends it, because it means you do the work, you put in the time, and you do it for the whole nation. That you don't just gather on a coast or something and tell everybody else how to think. Yeah. And so I think that Harris, in her way of broadening the electorate in ways that the personhood vote did here in 2011, and then all the political strategists stuffed the lessons down a memory hole in the state of Mississippi. It's like, that's what everybody needs to see. They need to see a strong woman. They need to see a strong Black and brown woman doing the kinds of things that she has been doing, and the strength of that. And I think that can ultimately resonate to good people across the political spectrum.
Donna, that's got to be the last word. We ran a little over time. I'm very grateful that you would spend some of your time talking to those of us in the upper Midwest. And just tell everybody, if they're interested, how to find and read, read about things in Mississippi.
Sure. Our website is MississippiFreePress.org, just the way it sounds. Yep. And you can sign up for our free newsletter. And, if you want to support us, we are a nonprofit. So, we always welcome that as well. Next week, by the way, Stuart Stevens, who is on our advisory board and is from Mississippi, is going to come on for an event and talk about the election. So there will be information about that on there if people want to join that as well.
That's great. Thank you very much for all your work and for your time.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Edwin Eisendrath is taking your calls now at 773-763-9278. The Big Picture is on now. WCPT 820.
It's not Edwin Eisendrath. It's Paul Shivari. Edwin is, if you heard at the beginning of the show, is knocking on doors in the battleground state of Wisconsin, and we thank him for doing that. I thought he'd be in Michigan this week, but Wisconsin has been a major focus of WCPT, and I think that's just by coincidence. Our neighbor to the north, we really care about what happens up there, a beautiful state, and we thank Edwin as well as everyone up there from Illinois going up there to try and share with our friends about this election and what they can do to help our nation, as well as their state. They have a lot of different battleground, House of Representative matchups going on. The Senate, of course, Tammy Baldwin and Eric Hovde going up against each other. Tammy Baldwin looking for her third term. I'm hoping to be up there on Tuesday night. Tentatively, I'm supposed to be in Wisconsin for WCPT covering the election that night. I'm not sure yet where I'm going to be, but please listen to WCPT on Tuesday night. We will be covering the election, the local races here in Illinois. Of course, Kamala Harris, hoping that night we will see her declared the winner and the next president of the United States. We don't have any Senate races in Illinois, but give it 2 years, we'll be back on track with that. But yeah, it's going to be an exciting night. We'll be here to cover it for you here on WCPT. But this is the portion of the show where I will take your calls, and anything you want to talk about that you heard in this show, anything that you want to talk about leading up to Tuesday night. This is exciting. It's the last weekend before the 2024 election, and hopefully Kamala Harris will be our next president. Let's go to Jim in Chicago. Jim, thank you for joining us here on The Big Picture. What's on your mind today?
Hello, Paul. Good to hear your voice. I'm just questioning how this wayward celebrity got the lead in this Republican tragedy. How he wrested the lead in this Republican tragedy is anybody's guess. But I'm looking forward to the close of this monstrosity on the 5th. And ripping up my take.
Let me stop you right there. So do you think, though, the way everyone's been talking in this last week is that it seems like Kamala's going to get this. She's going to win. But if Trump loses, do you think this is truly going to be the end of him? I know there's going to be months of him complaining that the election was stolen and that it was fraudulent and people in disbelief. His base is going to be in disbelief that he's not as popular as they think he is. But do you truly think that in 4 years, this is going to be the end we hear of him?
Yeah, of course they do, because the truth of the matter is, everybody is yesterday's man at some point in their life, all of us. And he's no different than anybody else. And he'll be gone. But the Republican Party is going to have the taint for a while. And I also think that going forward, 2026, if I'm still kicking, I expect the Democrats to really get a real grasp on the House and the Senate and get some reform in the Supreme Court. That's what I'm looking forward to, Paul. And I'm looking forward to Tuesday, and I'm glad to hear your voice. And keep the faith, my brother, and take care, Paulie. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim, and it's great to hear your voice, too. He's right, though, in terms of this, no matter who wins on Tuesday, it will be important for a few spots in the Supreme Court. We said this in 2016. We saw the result with Trump naming 3 different judges, although on 2 of them being on completely opposing sort of philosophies. But once again, if Trump wins, I could guarantee that Clarence Thomas is going to bow down. But I think if Kamala Harris wins, Thomas is going to try and live it out, and Sonia Sotomayor is probably going to be replaced. And then, of course, Samuel Alito, Justice Alito, what would happen to him regardless of each side? Would he try and stay through Kamala, or would Trump replace him if he stays in? But let's go to another call. Paul in Seattle is on the line. Paul, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Paul. Yeah, I wanted to talk about, 2 guests, the last 2 guests talking about knowing the history of our country, and an hour ago, the second half of the last hour, Edwin was interviewing somebody who said, when Trump contests the election and this may end up in the Supreme Court. I have mentioned this on Kitchen Table Progressive so many times. I almost listen again, everybody. Technically, and the Supreme Court did rule in Bush versus Gore in 2000, we don't have a constitutional right to vote for president. You vote for president in your state as a provision of your state legislature. You have a right in your state if your state gives you that right. And since the election of 1880, all the states have decided to choose the electors that vote for president this year it will be on December 16th, I think. That's when they go to the state capitals. The electors are chosen, and it says in the Constitution, Article 2, in such manner as each state shall appoint electors in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct. Well, since 1880, it's all been a popular vote of the people. So technically, all the things that Donald Trump complains about are not federal issues. So technically, when you're voting for president, it's not a federal election. It's just kind of a straw poll. Probably more stronger than that.
State by state, but that's 18th century philosophy on an American election. It's, like you go back and look at how all of these early elections were determined, and I don't think you can get even accurate or reported numbers on what the popular vote was in the original 13 states, and then as they started to expand. The earliest data that I found was from probably like 1832, I want to say.
Well, that's because the way that not all the states, like I said, since 1880, James Garfield was elected president. All the states used popular vote of the people to determine how to assign the electors. Mm-hmm. Before that, I don't know how they did, beauty contests or whatever. But on that same ballot, there are federal elections. You do have a constitutional right to vote for your representative in the House, and since the 17th Amendment in 1913, now your U.S. Senator. So these are inextricably linked. So in other words, if Donald Trump wants to complain, the ballots should be thrown out. He's also throwing out, those ballots will also include congressional elections, congressional races too.
Yep.
And yet he doesn't have standing because technically he doesn't have a federal injury because it's not a federal election. The federal election is when the electors go to the state capitals on December 16th. And honestly, the Supreme Court had no business intervening in Florida in 2000. And the state of Florida, had it been democratically controlled in the governorship or the Secretary of State, could have told the Supreme Court to go jump in the lake. And they still, but you see, since Jeb Bush was the governor and Catherine Harris was the Secretary of State, the Supreme Court decided in the way that Florida wanted. So they said, oh, okay. But, like, for instance, the Supreme Court should have never weighed in on the issue of, privacy sleeves in Pennsylvania. That's not their issue. That's up to Pennsylvania state law to figure out. And whether or not the Supreme Court ruled the way I think they should have, which they did, they ruled that those ballots should be given another chance. It's not their issue. That's not my point. My point is that we have given the Supreme Court way too much latitude to. And this is, I'll say this: if the federal courts take up Trump's complaint, it can be both a catastrophe and an opportunity. A catastrophe because that would mean that twice in the last 25 years, the Supreme Court would be choosing the president.
I'm going to bring in Edwin to the conversation. Oh, I'm sorry. I just cut off Paul. I didn't even mean to do that. I thought I locked him in. But Edwin, I've got you on the line. You were knocking doors. You just heard what Paul was saying. Did you want to kind of piggyback off of that?
Paul has been clear about this a lot, about what the law says and what our rights are and aren't. And I've heard him make this argument a bunch. I want to say, I honestly know it's just a couple precincts in one state, but I got to say we have a lot we should be confident about. I mean, our team is out and out in abundance and out happily. They were happy when they showed up early this morning in the polling places. They were thrilled this afternoon when they came back with the results of their work. Paul, the work that we need to do going forward is real and hard, but I think we should be able to say the work that we have done in this election is also real and hard. And there are very few countries that can survive the kind of autocratic push that the wealthiest Americans and this movement led by Donald Trump have put us through. Very few. Hungary collapsed. They had a moment of democracy in Russia. It collapsed. In the 90s, all over the world, there was a feeling that the world was heading towards democracy, and that collapsed, and it didn't. It headed the other way. We are doing a great job out there. And a couple more days of this, if we don't slack off, I'm very confident that we are doing our job and that we will bring a powerful victory.
What have you seen out there knocking doors in Wisconsin? What's the vibe that you're getting? Are people kind of receiving the Harris campaign philosophies, or do you think a lot of people are staying staunchly for Trump, or are they disinterested in this election?
Well, so today, because we need every vote, today I focused most of my door walking I was asked to focus on our neighborhoods, where people have a lot going on in their lives, and voting isn't the main thing. These are folks who we think are going to vote with us if they vote. But again, they got a lot going on in their lives, and voting isn't the main thing. And yet, everywhere I went, people were, I'm going to do that. Yeah, I want to do that. Yeah, Harris, that's who I want to vote for. And I would talk about how to do it and how to make a plan. And a couple weren't even registered. They were just not fully, they hadn't had the experience of participating before, but they wanted to. And Wisconsin has same-day registration. And we sat and talked about how to do that, and they're excited now to do it. So we are reaching voters who, this isn't their topic. I mean, they're not people who listen to the show talk about politics, but they understand that this election matters, and they understand the stakes. The women surely understood it. They're like, I'm not voting for that guy. And a lot of the men were like, he's not really for us, where I was, in the part of the state I was. But again, these are people who have a lot going on in their lives other than politics. And yet they got it, Paul. They got it.
That's exciting to see. Do you want to take one call with me about the battleground state?
Yes, you take the lead. You're doing a fabulous job.
Thank you, Edwin. Let's go to Eduardo wants to talk about the state of Pennsylvania, which is another key battleground state. Eduardo, what's on your mind?
Yeah, Edwin, Paul. Yeah, thank you for taking my call. Yeah, I think Pennsylvania, and I've been hearing that's going to be the big key. Western is red, middle is kind of purple, east is blue. I've been checking out some people online. There's endorsements from Hollywood. I hope people do their research and not really go by Hollywood endorsements. That's kind of like lazy if you go by your favorite actor.
Let's remember, though, that they did put up Dr. Oz as their Senate candidate 2 years ago on the Republican side. So it's a state that I think has kind of wonky politics. I just want to give some kind of fun facts about it, though. In 2020, Biden won by 10 percentage points in Pennsylvania, the 67 counties there. According to The Economist, they're saying that if Harris is winning by about 5 points by the exit polling, that it'd bode well for Trump, and would give her probably I think a 1 in 2 chance of winning that state. We'll see. But Pennsylvania is going to be kind of the whole thing that kind of, I think, determines this. I know there's Georgia. I know there's North Carolina, Michigan, Wisconsin. Pennsylvania is a big one, and it made a big difference in 2020. Biden, of course, coming from Scranton before Delaware. I don't know how much that made a difference, but I'm wondering what sort of impact Kamala Harris is going to have on Pennsylvania. And Eduardo, I want to thank you. Edwin, I want your thoughts on Pennsylvania.
Honestly, I'm too far away from Pennsylvania to know. But what I hear from people who are sort of out there doing work is that people are coming from New York and Washington, D.C. into Pennsylvania the same way people are coming from Chicago up into Michigan and Wisconsin, that there is no shortage of people willing to go to people's homes and to talk to them about the stakes in this election and to get them to show up. So if it's close, I'm enough of a believer in what a good Chicago Paul always knows. You go to somebody's door and you ask them for their vote. If it's close, we're going to be okay. And unless it's a completely bizarre election where for the first time that doesn't matter, but I don't think it is. And I think we have news that our turnout is just, and our effort to get people it's completely swamped, what Elon Musk has been hired to do lately for them, which I don't think he's doing. So Paul, again, even in Pennsylvania and in North Carolina, we talked earlier on the show to Anderson, I think we have a lot to go on that we should be, quite excited about.
Well, thank you, Edwin. I'm glad you joined us for the beginning and end of the show today. Thank you for the work that you did out in Wisconsin these last couple of weeks. Looking forward to having you back here to talk about what we expect on Tuesday night. And hopefully we're going to be talking about the next president of the United States, Kamala Harris.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Edwin. And join us next week. Edwin Eisendrath will be back here to man the show. Of course, coming up next is Collaborative Action Radio. Want to thank you for listening to WCPT, The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath.